Welcome back, everyone. So, we've gone from a very interesting topic in sleep to one that may make you want to yawn. I know homeostasis isn't the most exciting topic out there, but it's a topic where it's a process where the body spends actually most of its energy, and it's extremely important. So, it's not exciting, but also, on the other hand, it's extremely important. So this is actually a chapter I've debated many times taking out, and every time I try to take it out, I'm like, no, I can't, because it's just that important for understanding how the body works. So we keep homeostasis, but we only have one lecture on it. So we have two videos for this. In the first video, we're going to talk broadly about homeostasis, how the body maintains. And then in the second chapter, or second lecture rather, we'll talk a little bit about when things go wrong with homeostasis. So, homeostasis is essential for the body's survival because it helps to make sure that everything is in the proper range. So homeostasis consists of maintaining particular psychological parameters so that they are relatively constant. There are three types of regulation that we will discuss: temperature, fluid, and food and energy. These systems are all quite complex, in part due to the redundancy. They all appear to be monitored by more than one system or parameter. So thus, to be honest, what I present here today are really just hypotheses, and there's likely more to the story that we have yet to discover. But I think what you'll see is the hypotheses we have are pretty good. They come together in ways that make good sense, and I think will fit well with what you already know about biology and about the body. So the homeostatic system is a system that works to maintain homeostasis through behaviors of the animal, whereas whether these behaviors are seeking shade, drinking, or eating. So the homeostatic system is really using behavioral drives in order to maintain homeostasis. So, like we've seen in other biological systems, homeostasis relies on negative feedback systems, in which the body detects levels of key elements and then makes modifications depending on whether or not those elements are low or high. So a set point is the desired value of the system when healthy, signaling that it might be a set point for temperature. So for instance, in the body, 98.6 degrees is the average human temperature. So this is the set point. This is the point that you want the body to be at. Now there's also a set zone. The set zone is the range of tolerance in the system. So this is where you're able to go a little bit above or below, but still be okay in the zone. So when we go outside of the zone, then the body works to get back into that zone in order to re-obtain homeostasis. So because of that, it kind of works like a thermostat. So I have a picture of a Nest thermostat. I have one of these at home. I love it. So with this, it's a fancy thermostat where you can set a high and a low temperature. So here, what they have said is they want it between, for instance, 72 and 75 degrees. That would be a set zone. And when the temperature goes out, if it's either below or above that temperature, then the system will work to get homeostasis back. So the body's the same way. There's a set zone, and if it goes outside of that zone, then the body works to re-obtain homeostasis. So we will start by discussing body temperature. We know that body temperature is extremely important. At high temperatures, proteins start to fail to fold properly, and at very high temperatures, our proteins actually start to break down and then reorganize, meaning that we literally cook. At low temperatures, the body slows or stops altogether. Thus, we need to maintain an ideal body temperature. Animals do this in different ways, and historically, this has been referred to as either warm or cold-blooded. However, this leads to the assumption that cold-blooded animals do not need to regulate their body temperature, and this is not true. Thus, the more accurate way to look at this is endotherms and ectotherms. Endotherms, such as mammals and birds, regulate body temperature through internal processes, whereas ectotherms, such as snakes and bees, regulate their body temperature through the environment. Note in neither one of these is it unimportant to regulate body temperature. It is just a question of how we do it. Endotherms have several key advantages over ectotherms. First, they're able to handle a wider range of environmental conditions, since they can adapt themselves to the environment. Second, endotherms have a greater capacity for oxygen utilization, meaning that they can be active for longer times before going into oxygen debt and requiring rest. However, there's a cost. A substantial amount of food energy, which we'll talk about later, is required just to maintain our body temperature. So while there are definitely advantages, the disadvantage is that you have to have a lot more food to fuel this body. So this brings us to metabolism, which is the breakdown of complex molecules into smaller molecules. This breaking down of molecules releases energy as heat. It is often measured in kilocalories, which is the same as a nutritionist calorie. It's enough energy to raise the temperature of 1 liter of water by 1 degree. When an adult human is exercising, one can generate as much as 600 kilocalories worth of heat energy per hour. But we can only generate about 60 kilocalories while resting, and about 1/3 at rest of the calorie burn is due just to the brain, so the brain uses a ton of energy. When we are too cold, the body will commence shivering, which is, of course, a rapid involuntary muscle contraction that generates heat. Shivering actually requires a lot of energy, as shown by the fact that it requires a 5-fold increase in oxygen intake. So with that, it burns a lot of kilocalories worth of food in order to create the heat energy in order to try to maintain homeostasis. Likewise, when the body gets hot, we also engage in compensatory behaviors such as sweating. So, as I mentioned earlier, ectotherms are animals that need to maintain body temperature, but they do so through the environment. So, for example, a cold iguana may lie on a sunny rock until its temperature reaches 37 degrees, or it may go to a shady place if the temperature gets above 37 degrees. Interestingly, ectotherm animals who have an infection will actually also show signs of fever, but the fever is actually behaviorally obtained. So, for example, an iguana may sun himself or herself until a temperature of 40 degrees is obtained instead of 37. So speaking of fevers, the purpose of them is actually still debated. We don't fully know why animals or humans have fevers when there's an infection, but we do know that it's something that is consistent across many species. So as I referred to some on the last slide, there are behavioral responses that both ectotherms and endotherms do. And these really fall into 3 categories. Changing exposure of the body surface, changing external insulation, and selecting a surrounding that is less thermally stressful. So, for the first one, changing exposure of the body surface, this is like that example we had on the last slide of being on a hot rock for the iguana. You can also change your external insulation by wearing clothing or a jacket. And then as far as selecting a surrounding that's less thermally stressful, this would be like going into the shade on a hot day. There are 2 different brain sites that control different methods of thermoregulation. So as you can guess, because the hypothalamus is involved in a lot of homeostasis and a lot of just maintaining the body's function, hypothalamus is once again involved here. So the lateral hypothalamus is responsible for behavioral regulation. So if you get rid of the lateral hypothalamus, you'll get rid of those behavioral the behavior such as going onto the rock to sun oneself, but you don't get rid of the physiological responses such as shivering. For the physiological responses, those seem to be mediated by the preoptic area, the POA. So if you have a lesion here, then you won't have any change in the behavior. You'll still, go into the shade when it's hot, go out to sun yourself when it's cold, but you won't have those physiological responses such as sweating or shivering. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier is there's a lot of redundancy in these systems, and thermal regulation is no different. So the brain and spinal cord also appear to have systems that help regulate temperature, though the set zone for both of them is wider than for the hypothalamus. So again, they appear to be primarily redundant systems in case the hypothalamus is not properly maintaining body temperature for some reason. So during normal operation, it is believed that the hypothalamus drives these other systems in order to help maintain homeostasis. Thus, the lowest level of the nervous system that is capable of maintaining body temperature is the spinal cord, and the hypothalamus has the smallest set zone. So notice I'm emphasizing this. It might be on a quiz. So as you can see, hypothalamus, smallest set zone, but you have a couple redundant systems with slightly larger set zones. So if something happens here, then the body isn't just set to freeze or cook. Land animals must also manage water levels in order to avoid dehydration, which is the excessive loss of water. This is done in part by water being stored in the body in two ways, the intracellular and extracellular compartments. The intracellular compartment is the fluid space within the cell, whereas the extracellular compartment is the space that exists outside the cells. One thing worth noting, and it's very important, is that the fluids within our body are actually salty, similar to seawater, but not as salty, but similar to seawater, which is why you may have noticed that your sweat is also salty. This becomes important for a few reasons. First, it is the reason why when you're dehydrated, they give you an IV, they give you saline and not pure water. If pure water was given due to concentration gradient, it would flood into the cells, causing the cells to rupture, which is a bad thing. Also, as you can see, or as you will see, I should say, the concentration of salt is one of the signs that the body uses for dehydration. So this is this is mostly a review, but a couple of things here are new. One thing is that water moves in and out of the cells through aquaporins, or water channels. So water is able to move pretty much passively in and out of the cell. So how does this happen? Well, it happens primarily through osmosis. So osmosis is the passive movement of molecules from one space to another. And just as a reminder, a solute is a solid compound that is dissolved in a solvent. So in this case, salt would be a solute and the water would be a solvent. So this brings us to osmolarity. So osmolarity is the number of solute particles per volume unit of the solvent. So as such, it gives us a measure of concentration of the solute. This is important for determining, for example, whether a salt solution is more or less salty than is naturally occurring in our body. And this has implications for what happens within our body. An isotonic salt solution is a solution that is the same as what is found in the body naturally, approximately 0.9% salt. The saline solution, which is often used in IV drips, is prepared to be isotonic. A hypertonic solution is one that has a higher salt concentration than the isotonic solution, so greater than 0.9% salt. And a hyposonic solution has a lower salt concentration. So isotonic is what we see in the body. Hypertonic is more salty. Hypotonic, less salty. So we'll get to why that's important. So why do we thirst? Well, there are two main cues, hypovolemic and osmotic. Both of these types of thirst rely on cues from the extracellular liquid. Hypovolemic thirst is thankfully rare. It is caused by a loss of extracellular volume, such as when one hemorrhages blood. In this case, the osmolarity, or salt concentration, does not change, but there's an obvious loss in the volume of the extracellular fluid due to blood loss. Thus, one's blood pressure drops and they become thirsty. The drop of extracellular volume is detected by the baroreceptors, which are receptors in the heart that detect blood pressure changes. As a result, the heart decreases the release of ANP, which is a hormone that reduces blood pressure, inhibits drinking, and promotes the excretion of water and salt. So again, we're decreasing this ANP hormone that's going to inhibit drinking and promote excretion. So as a result, the opposite happens. Blood pressure increases, there's a drive to drink, and water is preserved within the body as much as possible. Osmotic thirst is what we primarily experience. And this thirst, due to water loss, due to perspiration, respiration, or urination, the extracellular fluid becomes overly salty. This results in water being pulled out of the cells due to the process of osmosis that we talked about a couple slides ago. This can also happen, of course, by eating salty food, which will also increase the salt levels in the extracellular fluid. So how do we detect this? Well, there are actually cells in the hypothalamus called osmosensory neurons that detect changes in the balance of salt and water levels. They do this because they are actually more flexible than other neurons and will either balloon or shrink based upon the concentration of salt in the environment. They also have gated ion channels that open when the cell is physically disformed. So this makes them active when the concentration changes. So in case you wonder why it's not a good idea to drink seawater, maybe you've heard this and you never really knew why. Seawater is hypertonic, so it has more salt in it than the body's own liquids. Thus, it will never quench one's osmotic thirst, because it only makes the salt imbalance worse. It can also lead to cell death by pulling too much water out of the cells. So that's why drinking seawater is not a good thing. Perhaps the greatest homeostatic challenge for the body is nutrition. Although we have identified many minerals and vitamins that the body needs, we do not yet know all of the body's nutritional requirements. Further, of the 20 amino acids found in the body, 9 of them are either difficult or impossible for the body to manufacture. So they must come somehow from our diet. Thus, diet is extremely important for the body's maintenance of homeostasis. Nutrients are not used for energy, but rather they are essential components or building blocks that the body requires. The nervous system is in charge of monitoring nutrition and energy levels, as well as guiding digestion. It also has mechanisms for anticipating future food needs. So our basal metabolism is the consumption of energy to fuel processes such as heat production, maintenance, and other basic life-sustaining functions. It takes a lot to keep us running, and the basal metabolism essentially accounts for how much gas it takes to keep the engine going. It is estimated to be approximately 55% of our energy use, so actually most of the calories we burn are just to keep us breathing, to keep the heart beating and to maintain our body heat. We also use about 33% of our energy on digesting foods. We use a lot of energy just to, get more energy. So that leaves only about 12% of the remaining energy for all of our behavioral processes. Max Kleber created an equation to attempt to calculate one's energy use as a product of his or her weight. It works great at a population level, but not so great for individuals as many factors affect our metabolism. For instance, food restriction, where you eat less, actually reduces one's metabolism. So this means when you're on a diet and you cut your calorie intake, the body also cuts its requirements to try to prevent you from losing weight. This is why weight loss is challenging and done best in combination with diet and exercise, as exercise helps increase the amount of calories that you need. So, how do we power the body? The primary answer is glucose. Glucose is the principal sugar used for energy. It is also especially important for fueling the brain. We need a constant stream of glucose to keep going. However, we also have lags in between meals. Thus, there are a few ways to store it later. For short-term storage, glucose can be converted into a more complex molecule called glycogen, which is a complex carbohydrate. The process of converting glucose to glycogen is called glycogenesis, which is promoted by insulin secreted by the pancreas. Glucagon also plays a role in this system because it's used to convert glycogen back into glucose when the glucose levels drop. Longer-term storage is accomplished through lipids or fats. Fat can then be converted into glucose through gluconeogenesis. Thus, like what we've seen with other homeostatic systems, there's always a storage of energy just in case. We've already talked a little bit about insulin transforming glucose into glycogen, but it also plays another important role, which is enabling the body's use to use glucose. Most cells have glucose transporters on the cell wall that allow the cell to bring glucose into the cell. However, these transporters only work when there is insulin present. Thus, for everywhere in the body except for the brain, insulin is needed in order for the cells to use the glucose. So this happens in 3 steps. And the first step is that the sensory stimuli of food actually invokes insulin release. So much like the bodies of drug users will start compensating for the drug even before the drug gets into the body kind of does the same thing. It releases insulin. There we go. It releases insulin in anticipation of the glucose to get the body ready to be able to absorb and take in the glucose and use it. The second stage is the digestive phase. Food entering the stomach causes a release of hormones in the gut called gut hormones, which then impact the pancreas and lead to the release of even more insulin. And lastly, during the during absorption, we'll just say that. So the phase where you have the absorption. There are glucodetectors. These are in the body and detect glucose entering the bloodstream and then signal the pancreas to release more insulin. So, again, we have the 3 steps. We have when food is anticipated, you have an insulin release. When food gets digested, you have a release of gut hormone, which causes the release of more insulin. And then you have these glucodetectors where when the body detects glucose in the blood, it causes even more insulin to be released. And again, it's because insulin is so important for the body to be able to use the glucose. So that's why it's released several times throughout this process.